enviable opportunities to take part in just opportunities to say, this is what I learned as a child, and this is what I will continue to practice, I hope, to my dying day. So one of the best of those ever was to be invited to go to Burns, Oregon in 2017. Burns, Oregon is in Harney County. It's a 5 or 6 hour drive from where you are. And Burns, Oregon was the center of a very, very bitter conflict in 2016. In January of 2016, several people from Nevada came to Burns and led an armed takeover of the National Wildlife Refuge, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge there, and they stayed there. Some form of occupation went on for 6 weeks. The town was very divided. The town was heavily populated by FBI agents who were not, well, let's just say some of those FBI agents, a good share of them, had not grown up in small towns and did not have the diplomacy that small town originating people have. So it had been a very, very rough period for that community. In March of 2017, I was invited to go there. Two friends, Sue Arbuthnot and Richard Wilhelm, have been making a really, really important documentary about that county and its history, including recent times. And I was invited to speak as a Western American historian about the history of public lands, and particularly in Eastern Oregon. So I had the option of having the filmmakers come to Boulder, Colorado and interview me here. And I do know this, that the idea of a professor at the People's Republic of Boulder sitting in my office, this is not my office, but books, 1,000 miles away from this community that had been through such a rough time. If I were interviewed as a professor at a great distance, speaking knowledgeably about the dilemmas formed by the management of public lands for local communities, everyone's time and effort and trouble would have been wasted. So I asked instead, could I come to Burns? Would the filmmakers host me in Burns? And they were very gracious about saying that would be true. Plus, I would say, documentary makers have to travel with an enormous amount of equipment. I mean, none of us would ever go, well, I never go anywhere anyway with the pandemic, but no one would ever go anywhere if they had to carry all the equipment that documentary makers have to carry. So it was certainly a better deal for them to be, they actually live half the year in Burns in a double wide. So they were set up, they were ready to go. So I joined them there in March of 2017. It was just a little over a year from the end of the occupation. The community was still very divided. The folklore, which I think I got accurately, was that there had been, well, the better part of a year, more than a year, where the community had never been able to gather without some significant line of tension, fracturing that conversation and that occasion. So I was going to give a public speech there. So there's a moment where you think, oh man, what kind of overconfidence would I have to say, okay, I'll do that. But I wanted to do it, and I wanted to do it as well as I could. So before I gave a speech to anybody, I spent a couple of days in Harney County, and my hosts, Sue and Richard, drove me around, and we visited a lot of people who were in very different positions on what had happened in January of 2016 in their area. And we chatted and we drank lemonade, and every family, I think every family in Harney County has a border collie. And so everyone has a black and white dog, whatever their position on the federal government and its management of lands, everyone has a black and white dog. So they all, at a certain point, I shouldn't say this to the owners, but the dogs do look a little bit alike, and it's just like, oh, here's another border collie. So we drove around, we met people, we visited, we petted their dogs. And then after a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of that, I then went into the Burns Community Center to give my speech. I was going to, the history of the public lands and conservation and tension with local communities was one of my topics in my speech. And when we came into the community center, my host said to me, well, it's about 75 people. looks like there's somebody here who represents every position on the spectrum, politically, but also in how to, whether to consider the Ammon and Ammon Bundy, the leaders of the occupation, to consider them to be people who raised legitimate grievances with the federal government, or to consider them as invaders who disrupted a community for 6 weeks. So every position represented, and I'm going to speak to them. And they are all going to be in the room at the same time. So here is a backstage moment of people in my way of life going to places where we are unquestionably outsiders, but trying to be helpful. The one thing that has to be on your mind when you walk into the room is, don't make it worse for these people. Patty, whatever you do, if you have to fall silent, do that. But these people have been through such a rough time, do not make it worse for them. Alrighty, so the good news is I didn't make it worse for them. I think because I had been doing so much visiting and drinking so much lemonade, I actually knew a good share of the people in the room. I had, in the way of camaraderie with many of them. So it went really very well. And at the end of the evening, I think we all had the feeling that maybe a corner had been turned. Maybe the capacity to be in a room together, that might work. So there's more to that story. I'm cutting it short so I can get on to some other ones, but I will say I returned a year later. I returned in 2017, where Sue and Richard had another public gathering set up. I was going to get to be the moderator, but I was by no means the central speaker there. I was to host a conversation where the people of Harney County would tell stories about their mothers, their grandmothers, their great-grandmothers, as they remembered them and remembered the tales that those women had told them. So I gave a few opening remarks on the history of women in the West, and then I sat down and people from the community came forward and told stories. Some of the stories, the great majority of the stories, I guess, were about white settler ancestors, but there were also a good set of stories about Indian women as ancestors as well. And great stories and a wonderful time, and me just sitting there as the happiest outsider on the planet. Not that occasion, just and even forgetting probably part of the time that I was an outsider. So that was my experience in Burns. It's going to be, I think Richard and Sue are still on board. When they finish the film and do the screening in Harney County, I will get to be there again as the moderator and get to see a bunch of old friends and drink lemonade, pet border collies. So no, I am not an insider. Yes, I am an outsider, and I am stepping carefully. I'm feeling very privileged to be included in even a distant way. And I also think that I am serving some sort of purpose of having a small effect in changing the atmosphere, really by my sheer outsiderness and my determination not to make anything worse. So I'm going to tell just a couple more stories of me, or one more story of me in a rural community having not making anything worse and maybe making things a little bit better. And then I want to just tell a couple of stories quick stories about how I have applied the opportunities I have had visiting people in rural areas and small town areas, and also the vision of possibility in human nature that I got to see as a person growing up in a small town, born and raised, and knowing that I would have to deal with everyone there. I think as a kid, I thought, maybe someday I'll get out of this small town and I'll see other people and they won't know I'm Pat and Grant's daughter. And of course, as probably I hope everybody could predict, as soon as I got that, as soon as I went to college and I didn't know anybody, I was terrified. I was just in a blind panic of where is everybody I know? And so every place I have landed since then, I have tried to introduce everybody to everybody else as fast as I can so that they will know each other and I will know them, and I will not be the poor soul wandering the world thinking, where did everybody go that I used to know? So, okay, so several years ago in the mid-2000s, when coal bed methane was being developed in a number of Western areas, but in Wyoming in particular, I was invited to go to Sheridan, Wyoming, and to host a conversation between people, ranchers who did not own the subsurface rights and whose lands were being, in many cases, quite affected by subsurface mineral rights and the development of those rights. So I had two young folks with me. I had two CU students, Matt Ocasio and Christine Buckley, and they had come along to observe this and to learn how much what they studied in their classes connected to real life. So the three of us went to Sheridan, and at the UCross Foundation, well, first of all, we did the same thing, crucial to anyone visiting from outside. We spent a couple of days traveling around, visiting ranches, meeting people. I've never seen more wild turkeys in my life. That was amazing to see how many wild turkeys there are in Sheridan in a certain season. Anyway, so we learned a lot about the community, and then we moderated a pretty lengthy 4 or 5 hour conversation between surface owners and people developing the subsurface rights. I tell that story because that too went quite well. That was a very enjoyable occasion, and followed by a good dinner with various people and a musical group, the Fire Ants, and just a good time all around, children running around, very pleasant time. But to me, what was the great takeaway from that, and I mention this because this is an event hosted by Great Basin College. The thing that really made that event work, I was the outsider, but I had these two, maybe 20-year-olds with me. And those 20-year-olds, Matt and Christine, gave me such a demonstration of how incorporating young people into our campaign for civil conversations can be so crucial. Matt and Christine, at the coffee breaks, were heat-seeking agents. They went to the people at the coffee break. These two young folks would track the person who had seemed the angriest at the public conversation, go up to that person, and Matt and Christine, very young, very cute, would say, "Oh, hi, we are just learning this subject. We had a class on the subject of mineral development and subsurface rights, but you know so much more about it. I wonder, would you be able to help us with a few questions?" So watching those two young people, I guess we'll say work the crowd, astoundingly quick reactions to that. When we came back into the group, the man who had been angriest in the public conversation, the group conversation, had spent the coffee break with these two young people. So he raises his hand again. He's eager to get in there again. I say, "Excuse me, there's like 5 people ahead of you. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm going to have to wait. 5 people ahead of you." They raise their hands first. So I call on them. I get to this 6th person. I say, "Okay, now it's you." He said, "You know, I've pretty much said all I need to say. I don't really need to say anything now." So I thought, why in heaven's name are all these middle-aged people trying to serve as moderators and mediators when these young folks just cut through? So Great Basin College students, this is your moment. You will become older sooner and quicker than you realize, and so take advantage of these moments of your capacity to disarm. I'm going to tell just 1 or 2 quick stories about how these small town rural advantage lessons have worked for me. In one case, I won't trouble you with this story. I had a conflict with a person who was involved with the university, and we were getting nowhere. We were just deadlocked. The best we could do when we tried to speak to each other was just rehearse why we were so mad at each other. So we set up a lunch. We went to lunch and we sat down, and this man Byron and I started to talk again. And I couldn't, in no time at all, we just were sucked back into and then you never told me, and if you told me, I would never, back there. The waiter, we're at a restaurant, the waiter doesn't want to come near us. We have just this toxic little aura around us, very contentious people. So the waiter doesn't want to come get our order, doesn't want to come anywhere near us. And I'm just despairing. I'm just thinking, I don't know what we can do here. This is going very badly. So fortunately, I had a backpack with me. I took out a piece of paper, and a little bit to the bewilderment of my friend Byron, I write something down, just a few words. I can't think of anything else to do. I write down a little message, which seems very peculiar to be corresponding while you're sitting there in person. I hand him the little piece of paper on which I had written, "I came here to make peace." So he looks at that, he is astounded, he doesn't know what on earth to make of it, he's kind of paralyzed. And so I say, I have a moment there, we're quiet, I say, you know, I don't think I've ever asked you, I've met her once or twice, what does your wife do? And he says, well, she's a speech therapist. I get to say, I think that is one of the world's greatest professions. They have done so much good. And suddenly we're recovered. Suddenly we're back. We're living in a small town. We're chatting with each other. We're acquainted. So that would be one occasion where I got to say, this is what I learned and I can use it wherever I want. One more quick story. I was elected president of the Western History Association 20 years ago. The Western History Association had been through contentious times. I had been, I guess I'll just say, seen as a disruptor of the usual approaches to Western American history. A few of the older professors, very angry at me, and we had been fractured. Then a great majority of the members never were part of any fight and had no idea why there would have been a fight. But that had lingered for years. I will just tell you, too many years, that had lingered. So then I get to be president of the Western History Association. Then I get to say to myself, I don't want to be the president who carries in an aura of an old fight. I don't want to do that. So what should I do? So I was at the meeting of the Western History Association. I'm really only talking about 6 or 7 people who I will say had not been particularly gentlemanly in their conduct. One of them wrote an article about me and my approach to Western history the article was called The New Western History, the Latest Horror on the Block. Well, so just to give you one example to say this had not been a particularly agreeable set of exchanges. So I decide I want to change that. I walk out into the room, into the conference hotel. I start looking for somebody who had said something rather abrasive and abusive about me, which is an interesting way to walk around a room or walk around hallways in a hotel. So when I find one of them, there's only 5 or 6, so I have to hunt pretty hard, but I find one and I think, okay, here we go. This is going to be humiliating to me, but I'm going to make a gesture. So I walk up, I put out my hand, they are caught by surprise. I'll just use the first one. The first person, I walk up to him, I say, hello, and I greet him by name. I've not spoken to him in several years. He shakes my hand. He's clearly stunned. And then he is silent. And then he asked after the health of my husband, who actually had a stroke and been in pretty sad shape. So this man completely flummoxed, silent, and then just rises to the occasion and makes a kind inquiry about my husband's health after his stroke. And I think,
Kyle,
great.
What we say?
I think that was really, really great. And I also realized that rather than this being in any way humiliating to me, this made me feel like I was who I wanted to be in life. I wanted to be a person who didn't go around remembering injuries. And so I wanted to be a person who lived in a small town and who said, well, there's my neighbor. So that is my concluding story about me taking what I learned growing up in a small town and what I have seen in a bunch, and there's more stories where the story of Sheridan and the story of Burns, Oregon came from, just seeing people rise as that man in the Western History Association did, to say, we have our reasons to walk by each other glaring in silence, and we're not going to do that. We're going to greet each other and we're going to behave like people who share a neighborhood. So those are my opening remarks, and I'm only 2 minutes over time, which is spectacular for me. That is incredibly efficient. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. Those are fantastic, fantastic stories, and we look forward to hearing more of them. I was so eager to get to Patty and her stories that I did not introduce the other panelists that are going to be joining us, and I wanted to do that really quickly. I will wait and give their short bios when it's their time to talk, but we just are being visited by 4 fantastic panelists in addition to Patty today. We have Nevada State Senator Pete Gogucchea, who I see joined us. Thank you, Senator, for joining us. We have Daniel Corona, the mayor of West Wendover. We have Delmo Andreozzi, who's our Elko County Commissioner, and we have Margaret Johnston, who's Carlin City Council. So once again, for those of you who joined us a little later, you are in Civil Conversations, the Unexpected Rural Advantage. And we are going to be hearing some stories about civil conversation and our panelists' rural areas. Before we get started with Senator Goguccia, I just wanted to comment when we were planning this, Patty and Brad and I were talking about what we called the post office effect. So I don't know if that's an official thing or not, but we think we're going to make it an official thing. And for those of you who don't know, I live in a very small rural town, and you know that you're going to see that person, if not the next day, surely that day after that at the post office. And there is a built-in diplomacy that happens with all conversations because of the post office effect. So that was part of what spurred our desire to do this panel. So thank you all for joining us. I am going to introduce Pete Goguccia. He's a Nevada State Senator. He's from Eureka, Nevada, which is District 19, which is where we are right now. And let me see if I can move this over here. Pete Goguccia is an American politician serving as the Nevada State Senator from District 19 since 2013. He previously served in the Nevada Assembly, representing the 35th District from 2003 to 2013. A member of the Republican Party, he was House Minority Leader from 2009 to 2013. And you can tell a little bit more of the interesting facts about yourself, Senator Goicoechea, and I will ask you to unmute and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Gail. And yes, I know most of you, I believe, on the screen. Anyway, and now, Gail, you're in Tuscarora, right?
Right now, I'm not, although that's the Tuscarora right there in the background. But yeah, I'm in. I do live in Tuscarora. Right now, I'm at the college in Elko.
Oh, you're in Elko. Okay, well, yeah. So I really don't know exactly what the format is. Just an open mic kind of a conversation. Like I say, I've been in politics a long time. I was first elected to the county commission, Eureka County Commission, in 1986. I served 16 years there as the county commissioner. I'm very familiar with Delmo and his role. I've never been a mayor, though, so you know, that's cities were a little few and far between down in Eureka and across there. And then I was elected in '02 to the Assembly District 35, which was pretty much east to west. I had I didn't have Elko County, but I did have Lancaster, Humboldt, Pershing, a piece of Washoe, a piece of Lyon, Churchill. It was a huge assembly district. And then when I was elected to in 12, when I was elected to the Senate, it goes north and south, all are part of 6 counties. And I get to start at Jackpot, and it's 504 miles from there to Primm, down on the California border. So I do have most of eastern Nevada, and I always say it's the best place to be because I do have rural constituents, and they are the easiest to represent. They know their mind. They usually tell you what they're thinking, and I do really appreciate that. And for the most part, it's been this is my 10th session. I don't really. I'd have to look to see how many special sessions, but it's got to be 8 or 9 special sessions. So I've spent a lot of time in the building. I do go home to Eastern Nevada to get my mind right. I try and do it every weekend. You know, we need a little sunshine and a little cow sense, horse sense, call it what you want. But so I try and get back to the ranch every weekend unless we really get wound up. This is a very different session with the COVID, and it's these virtual meetings. I'm a people person. I really like to talk to people face to face, look them in the eye, and you know, I think it bodes well. Now today is the first meeting. Judiciary just went in, and that will be the first actual live committee meeting in the building since we started February 1st. So it looks like it's going to turn on Thursday. Again, by invitation, you can come into the building and actually lobby legislators and or testify in committee. So it's gradually trending. It's a little better. I don't have to tell you there were a lot of bills died in the deadline last Friday, over 300. And I think a lot of it was due to the fact that the process just wasn't working. You can't have a hearing, you can't get the testimony, you don't get the votes on a bill, and they don't get out. So with that, however, again, for your perspective and across a lot of rural Nevada, budget-wise, we haven't been hurt too badly yet. And I'll be honest with you, we're just doing a budget that's GovRec and waiting to get the guidelines on the American Relief Act and how we're going to plug that next $3 billion in. And I think it's huge, and I'm looking forward to hearing Delmo's conversations about Elko County and their reopening plans and how they're going to spend their money as well. So, and of course, Mayor Carano from Wendover, you also have some money. So it's very interesting to see, in my mind, what the hell the locals are going to deal with it, and hopefully we can get some insight on what works best for us pushing this money back down. So I don't know how this format really works. I'm always a lot better about answering questions than I am actually stand up and speaking. I like to take a page out of Amadee's, Congressman Mark Amadee's book. If you got over a bar napkin full of notes, you've got too long a speech, and just wing it and then take the questions. It works a lot better. So, Gail, I don't know how you do that. If there's anybody on the committee that has any questions for me, I'd love to answer them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Senator Gogucchea. Yeah, so we can wait to the question and answer section if you like, or if you have any stories of your own experience, especially in Eureka County, that you wanted to share, or we can just wait for the question and answer section. In particular, we're thinking in terms of the civil conversation aspect. All your years as a politician, having to kind of find that gray area in those civil conversations.
Okay, well, I can kick off just a little bit, expand on outside of politics a little bit. I am third generation rancher. My grandfather and his brothers actually came to northern Elko County, worked at the Spanish Ranch, actually started for Altuve Brothers, and eventually worked into their own sheep. And the Gogucchea family tree doesn't branch much in northern Elko County, but that's in the early 1900s, well, late 1800s, early 1900s, they actually came, and so we've probably been 125 years in northeastern Nevada, and either had a sheep, a cow, or a burro to follow someplace. And my lifestyle, has been agriculture. It was kind of a. I lost a son when he was 7 years old in 1985, and it kind of changed my life. And so, with that, I just needed to find a new course, and so I actually got into politics just as a way to kind of occupy my time, because it was a lot of lonesome time and too much thought. And so I actually got into the politics, and I'll tell you, it's a bad bug, because with that, now, 30 some years later, I'm still there. But it was, but I am really an ag background. I've never been a musician. I used to like to recite a lot of the old poems and stories. I can sing you the Strawberry Roan. Those are things you learn when you're 5 years old on the ranch. Also learn how to smoke cigarettes. There's a lot of background that comes with agriculture and being raised in those days. At the early 50s, we still hayed with horses. It was a great way to grow up, and we had sheep and cattle, and a lot of Basque sheep herders. I never did get fluent in the Basque language. Unfortunately, a lot of them at that time were coming over. They could talk Spanish, and so I got to be very fluent in Spanish, and just conversing enough in Basque I could ask how many sheep they'd lost, if any had been killed, what they needed for provisions, and where, what, and how. But and even that has escaped me. So, but again, that's part of, I think, our culture in northeastern Nevada, especially northern Nevada, and those of us that grew up here, we're marked for life, and it is really and truly a a lifestyle that I'm afraid it's gradually moving away on us, and I would hate to lose that. And of course, I've got a couple granddaughters that are into the sheep, and you know, it does them good to be 5 years old and feeding leppy lambs and taking care, making sure they get them in and out, and so again, the rural lifestyle to me is the most valuable thing. You know, as far as a civil conversation, the biggest threat I think we have in this state is changes to the Nevada water law and what that could mean for all of us and our rural lifestyle. So very concerned about that. It's not really a story, but it's kind of the story of my life. It was, like I say, I grew up horseback, herding sheep, smoking cigarettes, and I never could get the habit. That was the funny part of it. I never did actually become a smoker, but all those old hands that worked for us at the ranch used to joke about when I was little. I'd come up and, hey, Irishman, build me a moke, you know, and cigarettes. So that's a life you just can't replace. So with that, I'll step down. I'm sure you've got a lot more conversations and stories, and I'm waiting to hear Delmo's and Mayor Carano's.
Great.
I'll either stand for questions or wait until the end. However, I do have to tell you, I do need to, I've got at 3 o'clock I need to jump on too, and I apologize for that. So
That's okay. We know that you're in session right now and you're very busy, so we appreciate you joining us. So if anybody does have questions for either Senator Gogucchea or any of our panelists, Patty, please put them in the chat, and then we will have a question and answer section, although if we have questions for you specifically, Senator Gogucchea, we'll try to get those to you before you have to sign off at 3. So thank you so much. There's also a survey link for those of you in our chat if you could, just a very short survey so that we'd like to do these panels with other topics going forward. So we'd love to have your feedback on that. So I am going to turn it over. I'm going to introduce our next panelist, who is Daniel Corona, the mayor of West Wendover. So Daniel was born and raised in West Wendover, Nevada, and is a 4th generation resident. Daniel's success in the 2016 election earned him the distinction of being the youngest person to hold the office of mayor in the state of Nevada. Daniel's very active in local and state national politics, frequently volunteering and working on various campaigns, as well as serving on numerous advocacy boards. So Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Oh, geez, sorry, I just choked on my water. Speaking of water rights, my water is trying to drown me. Anyways, thank you, Gail. Thank you, everyone. As you know, you said, Gail, and Patty said earlier, there's nothing like the civility that you have to have being someone from a rural community in the grocery store or the post office. 4th generation going up now. And so we've been here, you know, since the inception of West Wendover, certainly, but just a couple years after Wendover, Utah was founded. And so, you know, growing up in a town where your family has such deep roots, I think it kind of gives you a unique perspective where, you know, we might have, especially being a mayor, or Democrat or somewhere in between, we don't agree much on the national issues, but we all can agree that we want clean drinking water in our community, and we want good things that we have in rural, certainly rural Nevada is where our local issues tend not to be, you know, partisan driven. It's more so, you know, issue based, not whether your political party agrees or disagrees, but whether you personally, or for whatever reason, you have that disagreement. I did want to kind of, one thing that I wanted to mention just that I've noticed here in West Wendover throughout the COVID-19 pandemic is we see nationally that, and it's somehow become a political issue. But in smaller communities, I think, especially when you see your neighbors getting sick or even dying, which unfortunately has happened several times here in West Wendover, that it changes your perspective on it. And so I think that's one of the things that's very unique to rural America, and that's why it's so great, especially when people like Senator Goguccia are representing us in many of us while he's out in Elko County or back home in Eureka, and people are going to tell him what he thinks. Oh, my audio is not working. Is that better, Gail?
Yeah, you were just a little bit garbled, so we wondered if you
Okay.
turned off your video, if it might help with the audio. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, that's another issue. Rural broadband, that doesn't have a political leaning to it. We all struggle with it. So I'm honored to have been asked to be part of this conversation. I think it's an important one because, as it's been mentioned so many times, we have no choice but to be civil with one another here in rural communities. And so I will stop talking and pause for any questions or hold till the end. But I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel. I am going to, hold on one second. I had to switch screens because of the video here. So let's go to, great, so I'm going to go and go ahead and introduce our next panelist, who is Margaret Johnston. Margaret Johnston is from the Carlin City Council. She was born in Elko and raised in Carlin. Her family moved to Nevada in the early 1920s to work for the S&P Railroad. She was a firefighter and ambulance attendant for many years for the Carlin Volunteer Fire Department. She's worked in the mining and casino industries her whole life. Margaret and her wife currently have 55 acres and are co-owners of the J&M Misfit Ranch, doing donkey and mule rescue. Ms. Johnson is an elected member of the Carlin City Council, serving her second term. So welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. It's been very interesting listening to everybody talk about the rurals and how we are in the rurals. And I love the post office effect. That's great, because it seems everywhere you go, you talk to people about issues in the small towns and stuff a lot more. And I really enjoy that. I got into politics because I didn't like seeing what was going on in my little town. It was kind of starting to die out. And I thought, well, all the old people at senior center I played cards with and stuff kept pushing me, you ought to run, you ought to run. So that's how I got into politics. I've never thought in a million years I'd do politics, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been a struggle in the small towns dealing with the COVID and trying to understand from the top down how we're supposed to deal with things. With our population in Carlin, dealing with COVID's been a real struggle. Between compliance with the face masks and stuff like this, everybody has their own ideas. And as a civil leader, you're trying to weigh the safety and the businesses and try to keep everybody going in the same direction. And I think as a small town person, you have to listen to all sides of everybody's conversation. Why are they getting so angry? What can we do to help? How can we gather together because we're Carlinites and work as a team to fix things? And I think that's something in small towns we do well. And like Pat was talking about, is listening to everybody and talking to everybody, get everybody's perspective before you try to decide or talk about things better. I'm not great at that, but I think that's very much needed. And I'm enjoying, this is my first panel in political stuff, so this is interesting. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much for joining us, Margaret. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know everybody's time, especially right now, is so precious. Let me see if there are any questions before we. I don't see any in the chat. Let me see. Okay, we'll go ahead and. Great, so we're going to go to our next panelist, who is Delmo Andreozzi, who's Elko County Commissioner. Delmo was born and raised in Elko, Nevada. He worked for the city of Elko for 31 years and was elected to serve on the Elko County Commission in 2015. He considers his personal strength, his experience, and involvement in the region of Elko County. Delmo and his wife have 3 children, all born and raised in Elko County. So welcome, Delmo.
Thanks. So a couple of quick things here. I don't know if I've ever spoke for less than 5 minutes, but I'm going to try to be brief. But I did want to say something to Patty. She had mentioned the Voglers, Gus Vogler. He was a ham radio operator here. The tower he built still exists in Elko, and so when she said Vogler, that brought back a lot of memories for me. And then obviously listening to. I am so grateful for our representation with Senator Pete Goguccia. Pete is he is an outstanding representative for all of us. And we are so fortunate for his efforts and his work and his culture. And I can only think of a couple of words that I was taught in Basco, and one of them is a scary Gasco, which is thank you, Pete. That's a scary Gasco to you, and we appreciate all that you do. You're a great Nevadan and a great representative of all of us, and I just want you to know I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. So there's quite a background, I think, for me that maybe people may or may not know, but I was actually born into a deaf household. So both my parents are deaf, and my first language is sign language. And my dad was a very gifted and well-known person here in the Elko area. Was born in Alazon, Nevada, which was a railroad siding community just outside of Wells. And later had a shoe shop in Wells, and then worked for the state of Nevada, where he had a tremendous accident in 1971 that tire blew up and hit him in the head, and had just a significant brain injury. And that was really my first taste of rural Nevada and what can happen in where people treat people with a lot of dignity and respect. That community, this community back in those days, surrounded my family with a lot of fundraisers. Elko at that time was maybe 6,000 people, and raised in the amount of about $20,000 and paid off my parents' mortgage at a house. My dad never could work again. My mom, just didn't have the skill set to work. So that really showed me the genuineness of people in rural Nevada. We talk about this civility piece, and there's a lot of truth to it. Whether it's at the post office, we're so accessible. Wherever you go, people, we go to the same baseball games. We go to the same places to eat. We're very accessible, and it's and I think for the most part, we're all just trying to do things that leave our communities as best as we can. I think everybody really sets out to do a good job. I think the other interesting thing about us here is we got to remember how isolated we are. We're not just rural, but we're isolated. So we're used to taking care of ourselves, and that's part of our culture. And so when you see some of this conflict that arises, you see that it's people trying to move in to help us when we're not used to people helping us. We're used to doing things ourselves. We're very self-reliant. We're the place where people roll up their sleeves and help other people. It's just the way it is. I mean, I've seen it time and time again. A family in need, and everybody in the whole area is pitching in to help. So, with my experience, I could go on and tell you lots and lots of different stories. I could, I had a phone journal that I kept for the last 10 years that I was at the city of Elko. I probably should turn that into a book because it's a pretty interesting set of journal that I had. But, everything from dealing with homelessness, which was a really complicated issue, even all the way up to this pandemic and how that's affected, how trying to educate other people in the state about the importance of mining to our local economy. You know, I could give lots and lots of examples. You know, actually being involved in engineering, getting recycling here in the Elko area, single source. Those were significant things that had happened. But I wanted to focus just really quickly on this healthcare piece, and you know, really what we've been able to do in a very short period of time. And that really is, again, you know, having people. I've been involved in a lot of different things. We need community nursing, and we hadn't had community nursing in Elko County since 1995. And there was Nevada Health Centers was brought in to kind of fill that void at that time. And when I got into politics, I didn't even really know, as well as connected as I was, I didn't even know who Nevada Health Centers was. I didn't even know that we had an Elko County Health Board physician. And so these were all things that I, you know, really tried to get in and try to build relationships and actually, and I'm really proud to see what's happened. You know, we have our hospital, we have, you know, there's certainly a perception of service there, but there's also the billing issue that's, you know, this, all these moving parts, and really trying to, you know, healthcare is so important to us. And we saw probably how important it was throughout this pandemic and this service. So I realized what the county had done a long time ago was that they had set this thing up with Nevada Health Centers. And it's, do you remember Ron Popeil? He's that guy that invents things. He had some kind of cooking thing. You set it and forget it. Well, that's in whenever we have something, sometimes you have to go back and check on it and make sure that it's still functioning right. And that's really what needed to happen. And, you know, Nevada Health Centers, as an example, they serve West Wendover, Jackpot, Carlin, they're here in Elko. So they're a significant key piece to our public health infrastructure. And so very grateful that we were able to grow that and stabilize it and make it better. But with that, something that I didn't even anticipate was bringing on the residency program through UNR medical residency program. Well, there's a rural track that's happening right here with in cooperation with the with UNR School of Medicine and Nevada Health Centers, and we're actually hosting these physicians as they're in their rotation. So all of this infrastructure that's been put in place, you know, there's still so much more work to do. I kind of very alarmed at the suicide rates here and behavioral health, and that was kind of going to be the next part of my tree that I was going to chop down. And then all of a sudden COVID came in. And this word that I've heard probably more times than I ever want to hear ever again is this word pivot. But it's really what we all had to do. We all had to kind of figure out what we're going to do. And I would just say, Gail and everybody else, you know, there are different opinions about what, how to do things, what to do. And, you know, I'm just trying to do the best that I know how. And certainly some of these things can become political, but for me, when I go home at night, I know that I have done the very best that I can, and I sleep and I get up in the morning and I just go at it again, and knowing that I have to, you know, that I'll see all of you, you know, you guys are my friends and my neighbors, you're my family, and we're all in this together. We all bleed the same color. So, you know, what hurts us all, what hurts any of us hurts us all in that respect. So, you know, I think that's how you get things done. And, you know, it's that, you know, we just think about our own state, for an example. The state of Nevada is not that big, but I've met our governor one time, you know, and so we don't have that same access to those folks. Like, you know, as busy as Pete is, I see Pete on a pretty regular basis, and I'm grateful for that. You know, I can collaborate with him, I can talk to him, and he champions these ideas and things forward for us. So that access to our local elected officials, that really is kind of a key thing to this whole thing. And you know, having I have respect for everybody, regardless of what they believe. I do know that as I transitioned from city employee, you know, that line that you walk is a pretty broad line. You can be, you hide behind the politicians, but when you become elected, you better know exactly what you stand for. And that's not that you can't have your mind changed, but you got to know where you are in that political spectrum. Otherwise, people think you're waffling or flaky or whatever the case may be. So that doesn't mean you can't listen, and that doesn't mean you can't change your mind. But you have to be pretty firm in your political stance. So anyway, I probably went 30 minutes. I apologize for that.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Delmo, and thanks for sharing your story. And definitely, I have a note here. Make sure Delmo writes book on his phone log. It's on my. And as far as the rurals, when I first moved to Tuscarora, I was told that we weren't just rural; we were the really rurals. Like there was levels of rurals, and we were the really rural. So that was new to me too. We do have some questions. I'm going to turn it over to Patty. I'm going to go ahead and read one of the questions and then just put it out to all the panelists. Is that okay with you, Patty? Okay, great. So I have a question. Can members of the panel describe an example of a discussion they had with someone who had a different opinion from theirs, and where after that discussion, both sides came to a compromise? So go ahead. Our panelists can all unmute themselves and just kind of jump in. I think we did have to lose, Mayor Corona had an emergency meeting, and I think we lost Senator Goguccia. So we'll just.
I'm still on.
Oh, you are. Oh, good, great. Great.
Just for a minute more, and yeah, I don't know. You know, I think I'm sure in Delmo's world, and probably Patricia too. You know, in politics, you end up with having discussions or conversations, usually on a number of issues. Sometimes you end up at a point where you would do agree and find a solution, and other times you just agree to disagree. And that's really evident here in Carson City as well. You know, even with the virtual meetings, and we are holding 4 sessions, but you know, I think and I think that's what really sets rural Nevada apart. You can have a disagreement and not really agree on the point, but whether you're talking over a pickup hood or a corral fence or at the grocery store, you know, you can agree that you're going to disagree on these things, but in the end, there's usually in rural Nevada, and I think that's what I really love about it, there's no hard feelings when you walk away. And unfortunately, I'm sure Delmo's the same world I am. Once in a while, we'll get a phone call that's a little hard to take, and that's not truly a true conversation. And so I always prefer, and I'm sure Delmo's the same way, to talk to someone face to face. I think it's a lot easier, a lot smoother. I think if you're on a phone call or worse yet, this new technology and where you start texting and blasting each other, it leaves a lot to be desired. So anyway, you know, there is nothing like face-to-face conversation. In the rural, it's easy. You might disagree. It's surprising how many times you can find the common ground. And with that, I really appreciate it, Gail, Margaret, Delmo, all of you, but I'm going to have to sign off. I'm supposed to have been there about 6 minutes ago. So
well, thank you so much, Senator Goguccia.
Right.
We really
Bye-bye.
appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Gail, I could chime in here a little bit too, if I may, because sure. I think that's an excellent question, but and I think as many topics as I've been involved in this 37 years, what I found is in most cases you have you know, this like 80 to 90% of the people can be somewhere in the middle on an issue. It's really just a few people on the ends that, you know, no matter what you do, it's very difficult to change your viewpoint. There are, however, some topics that people are just, you know, it's maybe very central to their ideological beliefs that it's less evident. And I'll give you an example. When we tried to address this homeless issue here in Elko, that was a highly complex issue, and that was one where it was very difficult to find common ground, and it was like everybody was either in one camp or another camp, and that was very difficult to navigate that. You know, we did it the best way that we could, but that was a very divisive issue in this community. But it really struck more to an individual what their central core beliefs are and their morality. So that was complicated. But I would say that those issues are far less and in between than you would expect. Most people there is common ground in.
Great, thank you, Delmo, for that. Patty, did you, or Margaret?
Margaret, after you.
Wow, the audio's off.
Oh, for you, for who? Oh, so Margaret, if you want to tell a story, I have one or two that I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Patty, and then the Margaret can jump in.
So I had a wonderful experience once. It didn't start in the least bit wonderful. We had written something about a water project on the western slope of Colorado, and I will just say, you folks in Nevada and us folks in Colorado, water, whew, boy, intense. So we had, my Center of the American West, something had gone into writing that I did not write, but it was under the Center of the American West, and a water lawyer, very forceful man on the western slope, called me. It's complicated as to how we got in touch. He was mad about what he wanted the regents of the University of Colorado to censure and condemn me. It was very bad. We got off to quite a terrible start. And yet I knew that this man, I had read a newspaper profile of this man, very famous attorney in Western Colorado. His wife had Lou Gehrig's disease, and I had read the newspaper article about how he went home every day to have lunch with his wife, who was really not able to go out into, well, she had very little in the way of movement left. So I knew that about this man. So he's got me on the phone, and it's not going too well. He says, "You goddamn yahoos in Boulder, Colorado." And I say, real stupid, but I say, "I think we'd do a little bit better if you didn't call me a name." And he said, "You're goddamn telling me what I can say now." And I said, "You know, now that you point that out, I am not doing that. Why don't you just call me whatever you would like to call me for a while? Why don't you just do that for a while? And then I'll just listen to that. And then maybe we can talk about the fact that I actually don't support the thing that appeared under the name of the Center of the American West. I don't think we wrote that right. I think you have a legitimate complaint. I won't say that yet. You call me names for a while, and then I'll get to that." And we ended up becoming very good friends and phone pals. It just occurred to me that I was hoping to meet him in person. We never met in person. And he passed away before I had a chance to show up in Durango and meet him. But I think I would have behaved well, but because I knew about what a spectacular person he was in so utterly sticking by his wife in her illness, I thought, I don't care what he calls me. I just don't care a bit about that. So that was really good. The other thing that I wanted to mention was a spectacular time, and I don't think a public figure could do this. I think this is where I get a little bit more license in the professor thing. I had a friend, a very conservative friend, back when I was a much more conventional academic liberal, which I'm not so much anymore, but back when I was, he and I were at a meeting, and the subject of affirmative action came up. This is 25 years ago, and Commissioner, it was one of those hot button issues. It just, whoop, what? So I suddenly had this inspiration. This seemed like a very nice man. We did not seem to agree on much on this subject, but I said to him, "Dick, how would you feel about our next meeting of this group? How about if we do a debate on affirmative action, and I will take your side and speak your side, and you will take my side and speak my side?" And he really was a really nice man. And he said, "Well, okay." And then I think within seconds, we both thought, oh, this is going to be horrible. what a mess. So, but we had to do what nobody else in America was doing 25 years ago. We got together for lunch several times, and we listened carefully to each other. We're taking notes because we have to speak the other person's point of view. And the result of that was that we ended up, I'm not sure that we changed our minds 180 degrees in any way, but we simply could not we could not bristle in rage when we heard the other position, because we knew the reasoning and the feeling that went behind that. So that person is actually still one of my dearest friends in the world from that. And I don't really think I would recommend that a councilwoman or a commissioner or a mayor do that in public, speak the lines, because I get the commissioner's point that you really do have to have a position and hold to it. But that was so great. Maybe that can be done in private or something, but just that stretching of my own mind and what I thought I could say, because I had to speak the words. I didn't just have to say, well, he said. I had to do it. And it was such a rearrangement of the brain cells. It was really, really great. And I don't know if there's any hope for that to be happening on a national scale among citizens, but whew, does that ever, and people my age, they have to keep doing crossword puzzles to keep their minds nimble and to keep from having cognitive decline. So don't do crossword, or do crossword puzzles too, but do that thing where you just think, I am going to speak as if I were the other person. And then in fact, you do it and you think, well, that kind of makes sense. So, okay, there's my point. Thanks.
Thank you, Patty. Margaret, did you have a story that you wanted to share?
Well, I was just thinking about when we got our new police chief, Kevin, and he is a wonderful man. He is doing a fantastic job. But when he was coming into being, I was voting against most things like his salary and things like this and all this. And I had to go and talk to him afterwards. It says, I have nothing against you. It's my beliefs that for the best of Carlin is not spending so much money and stuff. And I always want to talk to people and tell them why I react the way I do. When you have to stick to your guns on things, you have to vote the way you believe. And he's great. He said, no, whatever we do in a council meeting and stuff is business, and we can go out for a cup of coffee after. And we talk about things like that a lot. And that's something in politics that you've got to be able to do. You've got to be able to leave it at the council meeting afterwards and be able to be civil to people that disagree with you, and definitely look at from their perspective on things. And when you can give a clear picture of your perspective, it really helps. And it's not always easy to do, especially for me, because I'm not great at this stuff. And I'm a person that I hate to wait. I'm very impatient. And the mayor is patient galore. I'm the one like, let's get it done. Let's figure it out. Let's go. And he's like, oh, slow down. You got to figure out things other ways. So it's fun to be in politics. I've only been here for 4.5 years. I'm kind of still a greenhorn, but it's interesting to learn. And slow things is the government, and I can handle that.
So speaking of civility, Carlin stole that person from. I'm just kidding.
Yes, we did.
Kevin was a sheriff, and he had a great career, and I'm glad he's with the city of Carlin. But I had an opportunity for a jab. I had to take it, so I apologize.
He's
No
also
shame, Margaret.
coaching our football team. He's one of our coaches for our football team, and Carlin too. So we're double winners.
I have to jump in for a second and say that was excellent, because good-natured humor is key to all of this. And one of the things about living in a small town is that everyone knows what is goofy about you. Everyone knows what is silly about you, and they can be very polite and conceal their awareness of that for sometimes, but then you just know that everybody is ready to have a good laugh with you, at you and with you on that. But I also wanted to say on a different tone, I think, Councilwoman, every time you say, and you said like 2 or 3 times, I'm not great at that, but I'm working on it. I just think, yay, there's humanity, as we must have more of it, to say, I have that now. I mean, no, but to have that, I'm working on it. I just, each time that's one of the things I don't like about Zoom is you can't stand up and cheer. So I'm sitting here in my chair, but for both of our, and dear me, Commissioner, your story about your family and its origins, I want to ask, I know that there are several good questions here, but to see what people will do for others in trouble. My first husband died of a stroke in 2005. And I was overwhelmed with people wanting to do something helpful for me. And I'm going to combine this with humor, because they all wanted to help me. And I actually didn't have that many things that I needed I mean, I'm company, yes, company, but they wanted to do something more. So I actually I said it only very privately, but now it's 16 years later, so I can say it. I just thought, if I wanted to make all these people just feel better, I would say, oh, I'm so glad that you would like to help me, because I need a big hole dug in my front yard. So if some of you would come dig that hole, I really need that. And then 15 people would go, oh yeah, we'll do that. So then they would dig a big hole. And then I would say, oh, thank you so much for digging that big hole. I really needed that. And then they would go away. And then the next 15 people, I would say, I have a big hole in my front yard and I need some people to fill that in. Would you mind totally doing that? And then that would just go on for 5 months, and a bunch of people would genuinely be more at peace with the world because they thought they had helped the widow. And it was a wonderful demonstration. And I don't want us all to have to go around having tragedies in order to bring that out. So anyway, Commissioner, thank you so much for telling the story about the response to your father's injury, and what a thing that is to see when it's really in full. We're going to make this happen.
We have some wonderful questions. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to. There was a couple that I can kind of combine. Basically, like, how can we as rural residents use these small town and quote unquote soft skills to politely influence and or impact our more metropolitan neighbors? I guess that's really, that could be a whole other panel just talking about that, but I would love to hear what your thoughts are.
I can hit on a little bit of that, dealing with being from rural Nevada, small town. And going to the League of Cities is where we go to learn how to do all we're supposed to be doing. And dealing with the Vegas people to get their perspective on what they perceive as rural, what we're like. It's like, I had a person tell me, well, you rurals, we have to carry you on everything. And I kind of got my, what? And I listened to him. I was mad because I'm like, nah. So I listened to him, and then I asked him, one of the questions I asked, what's your budget for parking lots down here? And it was over $4 million. I said, that's our whole town's budget, number one. And he was shocked because he did not know that that's how small our budget is for our town. They don't understand. We don't understand them because they put in big stadiums that we're going, why? We can't get our infrastructure done with the NDOT down here because they're out there and things like that. But when you sit and listen with each other and talk, we're all the same. We're all trying to do the best for our towns. We're trying to do what's right. And when you listen to each other at things like that, you can kind of get each other's ideas. And I told him, my town's in the black. We don't run in the red. And he's like, what? I said, we're budget. We don't try not to ever go over budget. And our town's in the black. We have hopefully we keep the reserve for a while, but on the other side of that, we still have $33 million worth of infrastructure we're trying to figure out how to get here. So if everybody can look at each other's sides a little more and listen to each other carefully and wait to hear, get over the anger and listen to each other clearly and get that perception, it's hard to do, but it's really good to have things like that where you work together and go to these conferences and listen to each other. Thanks.
Maybe I could piggyback a little bit. I really think Margaret hit the nail on the head. It really is perspective. And so, unfortunately numbers is influence. And so we don't have as much influence, it's just like, when you think about the Senator P. Gogucea's district, it is massive. So, it's those numbers and perspective. And I heard something once in my youth that made a lot of sense to me. And Margaret was kind of touching on this. I can't even begin to imagine what their issues, but it's about perspective. Someone did this to me. They said, Delmo, what do you see there? I said, I see your hand. Yeah, but describe my hand. And I said, okay, well, I can see your thumb and the fingers and your palm. And he goes, exactly. He goes, I see the same finger and the fingers, but instead of the palm, I see this side of the hand. And that really resonated with me. That I've carried that with me for my whole life, not just in rural versus urban, but my children, my relationship with my children. And, you know, it's all about that perspective. So I think that would be a key thing if we could really master illustrating our perception, but it's difficult to do because we just don't have the numbers to do that. But it's an excellent question, and if we can crack that nut, I think that would go a long ways to help unify our state.
Thank you for that, Delmo. One more quick question. Let's see. So to my knowledge, most, if not all, the representative in rural areas are conservatives. How do the more liberal-minded residents as a minority have a voice?
Well, I have a little thought there that by my choosing, as I have chosen, as a university-based person who's out in public audiences a lot, one of the things that I feel that I'm often doing as a moderator is making sure that someone who feels she or he will not get a chance to speak gets a chance to speak. And in fact, I was just starting to respond in the chat to this one question about how, in fact, as much as everything we have said about small communities and their civility and their helpfulness, that's all true. And any population, there are people who will not be living up to an ideal, because that is what our species is really good at. I shall swerve just for a second and say that, 30 years ago, I had this little thing going where I would ask people who work with the public, hotel clerks or cab drivers or waitresses or whatever, I would say, what percentage of the world is composed of jerks, of the human species, would you say was composed of jerks? Everyone could define it as they preferred. And the estimates almost always came in like 10 to 15% was sort of the common one. The man installed a heater in my house said it was 85%, but I think that's because he had a little bit of a skewing effect on the conduct of other people. So, and the best one was a cab driver in Washington, D.C., who, when I asked him, he said, oh, no more than 5%. I said, well, how could that be? One of them just pulled in front of us. He said, well, there's only 5% jerks, but they move around a lot. Multiple county society. So a pretty good idea there. So I don't know where it's, but somewhere in the 5 to 15%, there are people that you just think, really, why did you think this was a way to go through life? What I think we need to be working on as a species is how to say to them, well, let's not get you more defensive and more angry and more refusing the congeniality and the collegiality that could be yours. Let's figure out how to bring you in. Let's figure out what we can do that might make you think, oh, there might be a better way to get this point across than that vitriol or that bitterness or whatever. But we are lacking as a species in how to say to the others among us, why don't you join us? Why not come along in some way there? So so I think it's Robin was writing some very important things about, well, it can get bad when someone, the story in the chat, so it's public record, I guess, of somebody asking who he had voted for before offering to help with a flat. If I had an opinion that very few people shared, and I wanted that to change, I would go around fixing flat tires. I would just think whenever I saw somebody with a flat tire, I'd think, it's an opportunity. I'm going to help fix that flat. And while I'm doing it, and while I have their attention, I'm going to make my case for whatever my opinion was. So it's a little bit pathetic that a person would think, I will exert my power by refusing to help with the flat. When I don't think you have any more. You'll never have more influence over a person than when you're helping them fix a flat tire. That is the peak of human influence. So put it to work.
May I
please.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So again, another really good question. I was kind of struggling to even think about how to answer that, but I had a chance to kind of collect my thoughts because, you know, I can just speak from my perspective. Certainly Elko County, and I think that rural areas generally, I mean, I hate categorizing them because I don't know, but I would say that generally tend to be a little bit more conservative than, you know, liberal way of thinking. But from my perspective, I don't if someone had something they wanted to bring up to me, I said, wait a minute. Tell me what your political views are before I think people are approachable in there, and you can share your own personal ideas. And then I would just take that a step farther. I mean, if you look at what's happened here in Elko and Elko County over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's a lot of change that's going on here. There really, truly is. I mentioned earlier that I engineered, the single source recycling here for the city of Elko some 10 years ago. If you would have said the word recycling 15 years ago, and you say that today, it's an entirely different concept than what it was 10 or 15 years ago. There's a lot of things that are changing and emerging. So I think that people of all persuasions I get some people that want to talk to me that are extremely extremely conservative too, so, but again, I don't say, well, what are your political views? I listen to all people, and again, I'm just talking about myself. I don't have any control over anybody else, but that's the way I approach it. I think I personally, when I ran for office, again, you remember, I ran on that diversity. I think diversity is important, and I think that's how we end up getting better decisions made. I don't know. I hopefully I somehow answered that question. It's a very thought-provoking comment, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Delmo. I hate to say that we have to wind down because I feel like we could continue this conversation, and I hope that we will. And so please, first of all, I want to thank our partners, the Western Folklife Center, the sponsor, the funding and support from the Nevada Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities made this possible today. I would like to also remind you that we have a survey. So if you have topics that you would like us to host a panel on, we are totally open to that. We really want to focus on issues specific to rural Nevada, but as everyone has said in this panel, we are all human and we all share the same issues no matter where we live. It just might be through a different lens. So I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Patty Limerick. I want to thank Gogucchea, Margaret Johnston, Delmo Andreozzi, and Mayor Corona. Is there anything you want to add, Brad, before we? Brad's been my silent partner over here. Brad McMullen from the Western Folklife Center. So, is there anything?
No. Thank you to our lovely panelists for participating today. Thank you, Gail, for organizing this and working with me to. You did most of the work putting this together. You're a lovely host and lovely moderator. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, Nevada Humanities and the National Endowment for Humanities, without whom this event couldn't have happened.
Great. And please visit our the Humanities at GBC site. That's in the chat as well, and follow our upcoming events. And if you do, we will not share your contact information, but if you add your contact information, you will be notified about all further events that we do. So Patty, any final words that you would like to have before we sign off?
Yes. I will be there, Brad. I will be there in January. Mm-hmm. And if I don't get to hang out with Delmo and Margaret, I will just feel something has been stolen from me. Not stolen, that wouldn't be the right word, but there was something I failed to do in planning my visit. So I totally hope we can do that. And if the senator is available and the mayor, even better, and Gail and Brad, of course. So I'm at peace with the fact that I don't live close to you. And I certainly take the point about that you are not only rural, but you're isolated, and it is a little bit hard to get to where you are. But I so hope this will not be my only visit with all of you, and don't be strangers, because you don't feel like strangers to me now. So I think it's too late for you to try to be strangers if you were planning that. I feel that it's a wonderful way. We're all from the same hometown. So thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Patty. And we will all have a sarsaparilla at the bar at the Western Folklife Center. We will make a rendezvous for that time, and hopefully our next panel will be both virtual and live. So thank you all again for attending, and take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.